He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and this week we are diving into the extraterrestrial world by celebrating UFO Abduction Week. Now, I'm going to admit here, I hadn't realized that this is actually celebrated as a day until only a few short periods ago while I was digging up some recent info regarding extraterrestrial abductions. Now, we are a few days early, but we're celebrating it nonetheless. March 20th is the unofficial day where many come together to both celebrate and reflect on UFO sightings, abductions, and alien life in general. There's a lot of conversations still to be had about this, and we're going to get into what might be a bit of a very broad report in regards to being the first ever recorded UFO encounter, but it's prominently advertised as such. And it does go back by quite a few centuries, specifically to March 1st, 1639 in Boston. But before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, social media channels, and if you want to reach us directly, you can do so via CryptidClues@gmail.com. So like I said, March 1st, 1639, the governor of Massachusetts Bay, John Winthrop at the time, had made a journal entry that was detailing this event. And I quote, "A sober, discreet man named James Everell was rowing a boat up the muddy river at night when he saw a great light in the sky. When it stood still, it flamed up and was about 3 yards square. Now when it ran, it was contracted into the figure of a swine. It ran as swift as an arrow towards Charlestown, and so up and down about 2 or 3 hours. By the time the lights moved away, Everell and his boatmates had been delivered 1 mile upstream, although they had no memory of how." End quote. Now, alien abduction refers to the phenomenon of people reportedly being kidnapped by extraterrestrial beings, and even more so are subjected to a physical and psychological experimentation. A big indicator of these events, I dare say, is the missing time component. Now, this is a period where individuals report a lapse in their memory and awareness, often followed by a return to their original location, sometimes with unexplained details or errors in their actual return. In one instance a few years ago, I was looking into a case where this family was driving together along a fairly quiet highway at night when suddenly a bright object started to follow them. It went on for a little bit, but not long after this initial following, they had woken up together, completely unaware that they had apparently fallen asleep in the first place. They were parked alongside the highway, which again didn't make any sense. They're all sitting in different seats, which is even more of a mystery because they were all sitting in different places to begin with. So the other kicker was the last thing that the family remembers, like I alluded to, is that the family was moving in this vehicle and now it's parked. This sort of scenario has become very prominent in abduction cases that deal with lost periods of time. And I quote, "Portsmouth, New Hampshire. A couple claimed to have been taken by extraterrestrials near Franconia Notch on the night of September 19th, 1961. According to their account, Betty and Barney Hill saw a bright light in the sky while driving home at about 10:30 p.m. Betty thought at first it was a shooting star, but then it changed direction and moved upward. They stopped the car for a closer look, and through binoculars they saw an odd-shaped craft flashing multicolored lights, and as they drove away, the craft, which they estimate was at least 40 feet long, followed them, eventually descending so low over their 1957 Chevy that they stopped the car. Again, using binoculars, Barney saw humanoid figures in black uniforms through the ship's windows. The Hills drove away at high speed, and they had heard some buzzing and beeping sounds, experienced a tingling sensation, and blacked out. When they regained consciousness, they had traveled nearly 35 miles south, although they didn't recall the journey. Later, under hypnosis, the Hills described being taken onto the ship, where they were separated and examined. End quote. Now, just like how some places are more prone to cryptid sightings, some places are absolutely more of a hotspot for UFO, UAP, and extraterrestrial activity. When it comes to abductions, and feel free to take this with a grain of salt because it's based on, of course, people's reports, but while not all reports are true, we can never dismiss the full 100% of claims. But carrying on. In thanks to these sightings, the National UFO Report Center sourced reports between 1974 and 2025, finding that of the 149,000 supposed UFO UAP sightings officially reported, a whopping 36,286 of them were in California alone. Please note these are American sightings, not spread over all of North America or globally. If we break this down more, however, that's 1 in every 1,075 Californians possibly being abducted. But Americans in general, the risk factor is 1 in 1,834. Looking at how many Californians there are, just the odds of 1 per every, let's round down to 1,000. That's those are not great odds. That's a pretty high chance of getting abducted. I'm pretty sure you have a worser chance and worse odds of winning the lottery or the Super Bowl than something like that. But I digress. I have a list here in ascending order from least to most UFO sightings per state. So, in ascending order, number 10, we have Nevada as the lowest. Number 9, we have Colorado. 8, Arizona. 7, Pennsylvania. 6, Texas. 5, New York. 4, Oregon. 3, Florida. 2, Washington. And then number 1, of course, California, as we mentioned prior. There's a few of these that make sense, and I'm glad to see like Nevada sneaking in there at number 10. And yes, you got Pennsylvania, you got Oregon, you got Florida. So there's definitely some states that have some weird things going on. Of course, not just with UFO extraterrestrials, but with cryptids as well. But then you have a few other things that, all in all, I haven't really done a lot of research when I look at them, like Texas and New York and. California I've done a bit of research on, but Arizona as well. There's not a lot that I've really focused on in these different states. I'm going to have to examine and do a thorough breakdown to see what other kind of cryptids and mysterious things are unfolding in all these different states. We talked about it many a time before. Different states in different places around the world all have their different terms for Bigfoot. And it could just be a matter of like, hey, it's not always easy to Google like Bigfoot in Texas because you might not get it. You'd have to specifically land that name and Google will be like, oh, okay, I know what you're looking for. Here's a bunch of books you can read that are focusing on this by authors that live in the area or researchers that have done their boots on the ground work in this remote region. Stuff like that. You got to be very specific with keywords. But that's for all you researchers out there that are like me that are just trying to learn a little bit more about these things. But anyways, I digress. Moving on. I have one more encounter that was provided to us, and this gentleman had a cryptid experience before, but also wanted to let it be known of their UFO UAP experience. So here we go, and I quote. It was the fall of 96. The Halley Bop was streaming by, and my best friend and I had finished a clay pigeon shooting, and the sun's starting to go down. We grabbed a 6-pack from the fridge and decided to drive to an open field around 4 miles away and only a few short minutes from home. When we arrived at the field, we found a parking spot facing the road we just drove into, next to a scraggly poplar tree, and settled in for the night of listening to music, shooting the breeze, and of course, splitting the 6-pack we bought. So, we noticed something seemed off right away. The frogs in the area were normally going strong due to the unreasonably warm weather, but that night they didn't make a peep. We quickly shrugged it off and started our night off. Things were going well for the first half hour after sunset. We were nursing our second beer, and when we heard a large tree branch snap in the strip of woods to the right of where we were parked, this was around 300 feet away, we quickly turned down the radio and scanned the tree line for movement. We didn't see anything, but we heard a strange metallic sound come from the woods a few seconds later. It sounded like something, 2 pieces of steel sheets rubbing together, making an almost musical sound in an off key. That caught our attention for a few minutes, and we listened more, but we didn't hear it again. After that, we settled down, started conversing again. But after that, the radio stayed off. And as we chatted some more, we heard another branch snap in a different location, followed again by a metallic sound that was similar in pitch, but different in sequence. That's when things started to go from bizarre to horrifying. We scanned the woods, looking and listening for movement. Then a series of lights rose above the tree line to the west of us. Now, we both looked at it and at first dismissed it as a helicopter or plane, continuing to keep our focus to the strip of woods north where the sounds are coming from. My friend looked over into the direction of the lights again, while I focused still on the strip, and then he yelled, "My God, it's a UFO." Looking back in the direction of the woods, I started to tell him to shut up, but fell short after I understood what I was seeing. Flying just above the tree line and quickly approaching us was a massive craft. It was a saucer shape and had a ring of lights flashing in rotation around the midsection of the craft. It was larger in length than a jumbo jet and was that length or better all the way around. It was non-reflective black, and I can only guess that's because its ring of alternating lights were extremely bright, but didn't reflect off the craft at all. Now, as we watched this thing draw closer to where we were sitting, panic started to rise. We were talking to one another, trying to decide if we should leave or try to stay unnoticed, if such a thing existed, under the tree. After a short back and forth, we decided to leave. As it almost drew on top of us, I started the engine on the car while looking at the instrument panel to make sure it started. I looked at the time, and it was 9:33 p.m., and then I slapped my foot on the gas. We rolled out from under the tree and flew down the little trail that we drove in on, bouncing over every gopher mound and slamming against every low spot we passed over. With a quick right, we went sliding onto the gravel road, pushing the gas even more as I straightened the car from the slide. I was quickly approaching our next turn. That was a left. My friend was scanning the sky to see if the craft was in pursuit. I was yelling, do you see it? No, he replied, both of us out of breath and struggling to fully understand what was happening. He turned around in his seat to face forward again and started yelling at me because we were nearly at our next turn, and I was still traveling at a high rate of speed to take a fairly sharp left. I was still scanning the sky just before I turned back and realized he was correct. I jumped onto the brake and worked hard to slow our momentum while taking the left turn. The car shuddering as I took it into a slide on the gravel road, working to correct it. I nearly flipped the car in the process as we started down that road. The car working to return to a high rate of speed. Now, we quickly approached the first house on the road, and then it happened. Now, it belonged to a wealthy family, and it was absolutely huge. That's when I got a good idea of just how massive the craft was, because as I was passing by the 3-story home, the craft was passing over it in our direction. I screamed at my friend that I found it, and he yelled, "Where?" On top of us, I yelled back. He stuck his head out the window and yelled, "Oh shit." Through all the panic, I recalled that we actually had a shotgun still in the vehicle, and I yelled for him to grab it, and he did. He loaded it and went to begin to hang out the window with the gun in hand to shoot at the object. I reached over with my free hand to grab his shirt while trying to drive with the other. That's the last thing I remember. The gun never went off. The next moment of conscious thought was that we were both sitting in our seats in the car about a half a mile away from the huge house that we had passed by. I looked around and realized we were completely stopped, just sitting still. I yelled, why are we stopped? And then I continued to hit the gas. I yelled if he had eyes on it, and he said yes. It was flying away. I stopped and looked at it. Now it made a 45-degree climb and zipped away. And when we returned to his house and ran in to tell his mom, I looked at the clock and it was 2:15 a.m. We had left the field at 9:33 p.m. It was about a 10-minute drive from the field to his house. However, I didn't really piece it all together until a couple weeks later. I spent the first 3 days not sleeping, and when I did sleep, I had extremely bizarre dreams about 3 beams of white light rolling around on the ground, and these post-apocalyptic dreams of walking down valleys with human skulls and bones protruding from the dirt. Weeks later, I spoke to my friend again and asked him questions about our experience. Now, when I got to the subject of missing time, he shut down on me and said that he didn't want to talk about it again. I might never figure out what happened after he leaned out the passenger window with that gun, but maybe it's best that way. End quote. Now, I asked this person for a follow-up because I was curious if there were any developed occurrences since their experience, and I quote, "I went back once about a year after, during the day, It was extremely difficult to revisit, but I made it through. I would definitely agree with the fact that my friend shut down due to having more of a recollection of the events. Our friendship strained after that night. Yeah, he returned to alcohol and drugs, and I eventually left that town in 2001 and haven't been back since. End quote. I had deduced at the time that perhaps for their friend to warrant shutting down, maybe it was due to them recollecting more about the period where they were absent of time and not consciously present. I can only guess that to be in something like this, a situation that is mysterious and hopefully not painful, but recollecting it all, and it's something that is completely against our society's perceived notion and explanation that we just have no idea about, that would be very, very stressful. Seeing a craft is one thing, but being able to have the recollection of being on a ship, being on something that you know is no longer your car that you were sitting in, you're holding a gun, you're no longer holding that gun, you're paralyzed, you're awake, and you see these things that are not human, but sentient, just who knows, doing something around you, that would rattle anyone. Absolutely it would. It would take a really tough coconut to not crack in that situation, because it just is something that is so foreign and unknown, and we're told it's not supposed to be a real thing, although now it's a little bit more disclosed. But even the disclosure from the governments and the different sightings that we're getting is still a little bit murky as we try to piece things together. Disclosure is such a finicky thing, and it's proven to be more readily available now, while we have the congressional hearings and we have other people that worked in the military coming forward and sharing these stories. You think that would make all the difference, but at the same time, I don't know. Me personally, it just feels like we're just still hitting a wall with it all, and I really hope that we could just get that actual real concrete solid revelation, like, hey, okay, here it is, yeah, here we go. And I personally hope that they are very friendly and we're not going to go into an Independence Day or something crazy like a war or anything like that. Don't need more war, please, no. So I digress. Now there's something cool, there's a silver lining to this episode that I wanted to share, and it's a very neat photo from the European Space Agency. And if you're watching on the YouTube version, you're going to see it pop up here. And if you're on the Patreon, I'll pop the photo into the download option there as well. But anyway, so the most accurate view of the Milky Way to date, that's what this photo is. It's based on 3 trillion observations and 2 billion individual objects spanning over 11 years. So unlike static images, this is basically the European Space Agency's, the mission is called the Gaia mission. And so it was creating a precise 3D map of our galaxy. And so Gaia's data reveals that the Milky Way in motion, and it's showcasing the dynamic history of the stars. So this mission builds on earlier milestones. There was the 1989 Hipparcos mission. I hope I'm saying that right. And that mapped out 100,000 stars. And that was basically by expanding our understanding exponentially and confirming the intricate structure of the Milky Way galaxy. So Gaia has made groundbreaking discoveries, from identifying fossil spiral arms, remnants of ancient galactic interactions, uncovering filamentary structures at the galaxy's edges. It also revealed a wave-like distortion in the galactic disk caused by the Sagittarius dwarf spheroidal galaxy. It's a whole can of worms, and I highly recommend taking a little bit of a look into it if you're more interested in that. But as Gaia's missions, basically this mission is concluding, its final data release in 2030 promises that it's going to have even deeper insights into basically our galaxy's history, the Milky Way's evolution, and it's just going to be fantastic. And everything going on with the skies right now. We had our blood moon here in North America, which is super cool to see up in the sky. There's so many things that are just happening. At the same time, we have so many different extraterrestrial things that are occurring as well. And I know that these encounters that I detailed on today's episode are in the past. It's not at all dismissing the frequency and the occurrences that are happening now. And there's a lot happening now. Whether or not it's abductions or just sightings plain as day, there's a lot going on, and it's important to just keep looking up and keep staying in tune with what is going on, because I feel like we're at a point, like I said before, the information is murky and not everything is reliable, and we're hitting walls, but there are things out there, it feels like, where we are getting closer and closer to something happening and some kind of thing just going pop, and like, oh my goodness, here we are. At least that's just my interpretation and my feeling of how things are going right now. Of course, let me know in the comments. Let me know below. I'm super interested to hear what you guys have to say. Shoot me an email. If you've had your own experiences, I would love to hear about them. If you feel like something is on the cusp of changing or unfolding, I don't know if aliens are going to be just revealing themselves or anything like that. I'm not a prophet. I'm not going anywhere touching that with a 9-foot pole or a 10-foot pole, even an 11-foot pole. I'm not touching it. But you never know. It just feels like something's going to happen soon, but I digress. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and I'm sure I will be breaking into some more UFO abductions in a future episode. This is a lot of fun to get back into the extraterrestrial side of things. But until next time, everyone, remember, CryptidClues@gmail.com is where you can reach us, our website, CryptidClues.ca, and all of our social media channels on top of all that. So remember, everybody, take care and stay safe.